My name is Chidinma. For years, I lived my life 20 floors above the Lagos traffic, in a fortress of glass and steel, where the city was just an abstract map I could command. From my window, the iconic yellow Danfo buses looked like harmless beetles, and the endless river of people was a silent, impersonal current. My world was one of controlled climates, a place where the raw energy of Lagos could be observed but never felt. I was a poster child for the modern Lagos dream, a successful businesswoman whose life was a well-oiled machine, measured not in human connection, but in quarterly reports and market share. I had meticulously built this life by tuning out all the noise from the streets below, especially the city's desperate cry for help. The outstretched hands I glimpsed through my tinted car window were just scenery to me, a regrettable but persistent feature of the urban landscape. I told myself my detachment was a necessary tool for success, that it wasn't my responsibility to fix the city's deep-seated issues. I was busy, I was important, and I had earned the right to live within my fortress, safe and undisturbed. And I was wrong. So profoundly, devastatingly wrong. I had mistaken my isolation for strength and my indifference for focus, believing I was looking down on the world from a position of power. In reality, I was just blind, completely oblivious to the truths that lay just beyond my gilded cage. I had insulated myself so thoroughly that the struggles of others felt like they belonged to another world entirely, one that had no bearing on my own. I was so proud of climbing to the top that I had forgotten what life was like on the ground. But the truth was waiting, ready for a single crack in my armor to flood in and change absolutely everything. If you had told me a year ago that my entire life, everything I thought I knew about strength, wealth, and my own purpose would be shattered and rebuilt over a simple, whispered plea for a plate of rice, I would have laughed in your face. The idea would have seemed like the plot of a sentimental movie, completely detached from the harsh reality I navigated every day. Back then, I was a different person, a woman encased in a self-imposed shell of ambition and efficiency, too important to be interrupted. My schedule was a fortress as formidable as my office building, with no room for deviations, especially not for persistent hum of need that was the background music of Lagos. Every deal closed was another stone in the wall I built around my heart, and I saw compassion as a liability in my cutthroat world, a weakness to be exploited. But then came a whisper, a single, small voice that somehow managed to cut to the deafening roar of traffic, the incessant ringing of my phone, and the clamor of my own ambition. It was a sound so quiet and yet so powerful that it pierced through every layer of my defense, reaching a part of me I thought had long since atrophied from disuse. That whisper did more than just get my attention. It set me on a path I never intended to walk, leading me away from the manicured lawns of my existence and into the heart of a truth I had spent my entire adult life trying to ignore. It was a truth that would ultimately force me to tear down my own fortress, brick by painful brick. My days were a finely tuned machine, and I found immense comfort in their rigid predictability, a structure that insulated me from the chaos I disdained. The day began with a shrill command of 5 a.m. alarm, immediately followed by a punishing workout at 6 a.m. This was not about health. It was a daily ritual of domination, of forging my body into the same disciplined, unfeeling instrument as my will. I treated fatigue as a weakness to be crushed, pushing myself to the brink as a way to prove that I was in absolute control of my physical self, a necessary prerequisite for controlling the world of business I inhabited. This self-inflicted pain was a way to numb myself to any other sensations, a way to start the day already hardened against the world. After conquering my own body, I would select my armor for the day. This was a process just as deliberate and strategic as any boardroom negotiation. My wardrobe consisted of a collection of tailored suits, each impeccably sharp and severe, designed to project an aura of untouchable authority before I had even uttered a single word. These were not clothes. They were my uniform for battlefield of corporate Lagos. The sharp lines, the dark colors, the expensive fabric, all of it was a carefully constructed facade, a visual barrier that communicated my status and my unwillingness to be approached on any level other than the professional. I was building a persona, one that was as formidable and impenetrable as my office building. The chauffeur-driven ride to the morning rush was a journey through a world I was no longer truly a part of. Safely cocooned behind tinted glass, I observed the city come to life as if watching a silent film. I saw the vibrant anchor prints of the women setting up their market stalls, a riot of color and life that I registered only as a passing pattern. I saw the steam rising from bubbling pot of Accra and could just faintly detect the smoky, sweet smell of roasted corn. But these sensory details were immediately neutralized by my car's sterile, air-conditioned climate. The glass served as a literal and metaphorical barrier, allowing me to witness the spectacle of Lagos life without ever having to engage with it, feel its heat, or breathe its air. My office, in stark contrast, was my true sanctuary, a haven of minimalist design and pristine order that stood as a monument to my rejection of the sprawling, chaotic city below. Here, everything was in its place, everything was controlled. In the boardroom, surrounded by glass and polished steel, my voice was the one that truly mattered. My decisions were swift, logical, and final, my mind perpetually focused on the next target, the next acquisition, the next conquest. I had clawed my way up from nothing, and I wore my hard-won success not just as a badge of honor, but as a justification for my detachment. It was proof that my method, a cold, calculated focus, was a correct one. The drive home each evening was a mirror image of the morning's commute, a return to my sterile fortress. The iconic yellow Danfo buses, their conductors hanging precariously from the doors as they shouted for passengers, were just a dynamic backdrop to the emails I was still firing off from my phone. I saw the street kids, of course, their small forms weaving through the relentless traffic. Their existence registered as a tragedy, yes, but a distant one, an abstract, citywide problem that was certainly not my problem solved. I was insulated by my success, protected by the high walls I'd so carefully built around my heart. I genuinely thought that this self-imposed isolation made me strong. In reality, it had just made me profoundly and dangerously blind. That particular evening, a hard-fought and draining negotiation had kept me at the office much later than usual. As I finally left the building, the air outside was thick and heavy, the day's oppressive heat finally breaking under the humid cloak of night. A rare wave of mental exhaustion washed over me, and feeling a strange, uncharacteristic urge, I decided to walk the last few blocks to my apartment. A spontaneous act so contrary to my rigid nature that it felt like a minor rebellion. The streets were still teeming with a vibrant, chaotic energy, a symphony of blaring horns, shouting vendors, and overlapping conversations that I was usually shielded from. It was a crack in my routine, a small deviation that left me vulnerable, lost in my own world, already mapping out the next day's strategy. I was abruptly pulled back to reality by a small but surprisingly insistent tug on the sleeve of my suit jacket. I looked down, my first reaction a jolt of pure, unadulterated annoyance at the interruption, at the physical contact from a stranger. A little girl, no older than 7 or 8, stood there, almost swallowed by the dim, uncertain glow of the street lighting. She was tiny, engulfed in a faded yellow dress that clearly seen better days, its original bright color muted by layers of dirt and time. Her feet, clad in worn-out plastic slippers that were cracked and gray, seemed impossibly small on the grimy pavement. It was her eyes, however, that arrested my annoyed dismissal. They were large and dark, and they held a profound, heartbreaking weariness, a deep, sorrowful gravity that no child should ever possess. "Auntie, please," she whispered, her voice so soft it was almost lost in cacophony of the night air, yet sliced through the noise with stunning clarity. "My brother is hungry. He is very hungry. Can you help us?" The plea was simple, direct, and devoid of any practiced whining. It was a quiet statement of a desperate fact. My immediate, conditioned reaction was a surge of hardened cynicism, the default setting I had developed over years of navigating the city. I had heard all the stories about organized begging rings that cruelly exploited children for profit. My hand instinctively tightened its grip on my expensive leather handbag as my internal walls went up. "No, sorry," I said, my voice clipped and cool, my body already turning to walk away. It was the same automatic script, the same cold dismissal I had deployed 100 times before, a mechanism to protect my space and my conscience. But she didn't let go of my sleeve. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't amplify her plea for dramatic effect. She just stood there, her small hand still holding on, and held my gaze with her own, which was steady, unwavering, and unervingly direct. There were no theatrics, no practice performance designed to elicit pity from a wealthy stranger. There was only a quiet, raw, and shattering dignity in her posture. It was a simple, devastating truth reflected in her eyes that stopped me cold, that sliced through all my defenses, my well-rehearsed excuses, and my cynical assumptions. For the first time in a very long time, I didn't see a statistic, a nuisance, or a potential scam. I saw a child. Where is he? I heard myself ask, the words feeling strange and foreign on my tongue. He is at home. It is not far from here, she replied, her grip finally loosening as a tiny, fragile flicker of hope ignited in her weary eyes. Show me, I said, surrendering to an impulse I didn't understand, making the life-altering decision before my rational mind could object. I want to see for myself. Her name was Adiz. As she turned to lead me away from the relative brightness of the main road, every single step took me deeper into a version of Lagos I had only ever glimpsed from the sterile, air-conditioned bubble of my car. We quickly left the paved sidewalks behind, plunging into a claustrophobic maze of narrow, unlit alleyways that felt like the city's hidden veins. The familiar roar of traffic faded, replaced by the intimate sounds of life packed too tightly together. The sharp cry of a baby from an unseen room, the sizzle of something frying on a charcoal pot nearby, the low murmur of a radio playing from behind a curtained window. The ground beneath my feet was a treacherous, uneven mix of hard-packed earth, loose sand, and sharp, broken pieces of concrete. My expensive high-heeled shoes, designed for polished boardroom floors, felt utterly absurd and inadequate for this terrain, turning my every step into a careful, clumsy negotiation. Open drains carrying murky, stagnant water ran along the sides of the path, and the air grew thick with a complex and overwhelming blend of smells, the acrid smoke of burning wood, the damp richness of the earth, the sharp aroma of cooking spices, and an underlying scent of decay and desperation. This wasn't the Lagos of corporate ambition that I knew. This was the raw, visceral Lagos of day-to-day survival. The visual landscape was one of profound precarity. Tin-roof shacks, constructed from a chaotic patchwork of corrugated metal, salvaged wood, and plastic sheets, were pressed tightly against each other. They seemed to lean into one another as if for mutual support, their very structure a testament to the fragile existence of their inhabitants. Dim, flickering light from kerosene lamps and bare bulbs escaped through the cracks, offering fleeting, intimate glimpses into lives I couldn't begin to comprehend. The overwhelming feeling was one of being enclosed, of being swallowed by a world operating on rules I had never learned. Suddenly, a group of barefoot kids stopped their makeshift game of football, their ball a tattered bundle of rags tightly bound with string, to stare at me as I passed. Their game ceased, their chatter died, and all their attention focused on the bizarre spectacle I presented. They weren't just staring at a stranger. They were staring at an alien who had landed in their universe. Under their silent, curious, and perhaps even judgmental scrutiny, my tailored suit and designer handbag transformed from symbols of my power and success into a gaudy, ridiculous costume that marked me as an intruder. I watched Adiz as she expertly navigated the labyrinthine maze with a heartbreaking and practiced familiarity. She moved with a quiet, certain confidence that made my own hesitant, teetering steps feel all the more foolish and out of place. A deep and unsettling shame began to creep into my consciousness, a slow burn that grew with every turn we took. This entire world, this stark and challenging reality, existed just a few hundred meters from my pristine office, yet it felt like another planet entirely. I had been so utterly consumed with my own journey to the top that I completely and deliberately chosen to forget what life was like for those on the ground. This journey wasn't just a walk. It was a powerful, unspoken narrative of struggle and resilience, and for the first time in a very long time, I was finally paying attention. After a journey through the maze that felt like an eternity, Adiz finally stopped in front of a dilapidated shack, almost indistinguishable from the dozens we had already passed. There was no door, only a tattered, faded piece of Accra fabric, the very material I had once so easily dismissed as a mere pattern, serving as a curtain against the world. She pulled the fragile fabric aside and gestured for me to enter. I ducked my head, a subconscious act of deference I would never perform in my corporate life, and stepped out of the alleyway's gloom and into profound darkness within. In that single, disorienting instant, my entire world shifted violently on its axis. The first thing that struck me was the emptiness. The room was impossibly tiny, no larger than my spacious walk-in closet. Yet it was meant to contain a whole life. There was no furniture to speak of, no chairs, no table, not even the semblance of a bed. There was only a single, thin mat laid out on the packed dirt floor, a flimsy barrier against the cold ground. The absence of things was a physical presence, a suffocating void that spoke volumes. This was the first blow. The shocking, total lack of everything I and anyone I knew considered a basic necessity for human life. My eyes darted around the suffocating space, desperately searching for any sign of normalcy, of life being lived. In the far corner, a small boy sat huddled, his knees pulled up tightly to his chest, his face buried in his arms. This was Emeka. He was so frighteningly thin that his worn-out t-shirt seemed to hang from his small frame like a drape on a wire hanger. He didn't look up as we entered. He just kept his arms wrapped tightly around his stomach, as if trying to physically hold in the gnawing, painful emptiness of hunger. His stillness was terrifying, a portrait of utter defeat. Adiz went to her brother's side and placed a small, protective hand on his shoulder. She looked back at me, her large, dark eyes, would have been so strong and steady on the street, now glistening with unshed tears. The fierce strength that carried her through the city streets and propelled her to approach a stranger seemed to finally dissolve, revealing the terrified, desperate little girl beneath the brave facade. "Auntie," she said, her voice finally cracking, the sound echoing in the stark silence of the room. "We haven't eaten since yesterday. Mama went to the market to find work, but she has not come back yet." And that was the truth. It wasn't an elaborate scam or a cynical ploy. It was simple, stark, and utterly devastating. Two small children, alone and starving in a bare room, waiting with dwindling hope for a mother who might never return. My throat tightened until it was difficult to breathe. The reality of it, the quiet, hopeless desperation of Emeka, the fierce, protective love that drove Adiz to overcome her fear and beg, hit me like a physical blow. All my cynicism, my excuses, my carefully constructed walls, all of it came crashing down around me. In that tiny, bare room, I finally saw myself for what I really was, a woman who had so much, yet had deliberately and shamefully chosen to see so little. I stood there for a second, completely paralyzed by the weight of the truth, my mind a blank slate, wiped clean of all my corporate strategies and cynical assumptions. Then a new, unfamiliar instinct kicked in, an impulse that came not from my head, but from a deeper place I thought had long since died. I turned without a word, pushed the tattered curtain aside, and walked as quickly as my trembling legs could carry me back through disorienting alleyways. It wasn't a retreat from the horror. It was a mission. It was the first truly purposeful action of what felt like a new life. I found a small, street-side food stall, the air thick and rich with the comforting, life-affirming smell of jollof rice and fried plantain. The aroma was a world away from the silent, empty shack I had just left. My voice, usually so clipped and cool, was urgent and thick with emotion as I asked the woman to fill container after container. I bought everything I could carry, heaping portions of rice, beans, rich stew, and fried fish, adding a large, warm bag of Accra at the end. I wasn't just buying food. I was frantically trying to buy back a piece of my own humanity, piling on provisions as if they could fill the terrible void I had just witnessed. When I returned, they were exactly where I had left them, two small, still figures in the gloom. I didn't stand over them like a condescending benefactor, a wealthy auntie bestowing charity. In a move that shocked even myself, I lowered my body, my expensive skirt be damned, and sat on the dirt floor with them. It was an act of solidarity, not pity, a closing of the gap that had separated my world from theirs. I opened the containers, and the warm, rich aroma filled the tiny room, displacing the scent of poverty. I handed a heavy plate to Adiz, and then I served another for Emeka. He finally looked up, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and utter disbelief. They ate in a profound silence, a quiet reverence that was more powerful than any word's thanks. They didn't eat frantically, like starving animals, but with slow, deliberate care, as if they were savoring every single grain of rice, every morsel of fish. Their quiet dignity, even in this moment of desperate relief, was humbling. Watching them eat, I felt something profound and irreversible shift deep inside me. It was a turbulent storm of emotions, a deep, aching guilt for my years of willful, convenient ignorance, and an overwhelming, unexpected wave of gratitude. I was grateful that this tiny, brave warrior had found me, that she had possessed the courage to tear down my walls and force me to truly see. It was right there, sitting on a dirt floor in a Lagos slum, that I finally understood what true wealth meant. It wasn't in my bank account, my stock portfolio, or the height of my office building. It was in the ability to do this, to provide a lifeline, to ease a hurt, to offer a moment of comfort and hope. That single meal was more than just food. It was a tangible symbol of hope in a place where hope was scarce. It made me wonder, how many other lifelines are just waiting to be offered? How many other Adizes are out there, their quiet, desperate whispers drowned out by the noise of our own busy lives? This experience taught me that we are all capable of being that lifeline. If you believe that one small act of kindness can change everything, please consider sharing this story. You never know whose heart might open or whose life it might save. That night was not an end, but a profound and demanding beginning. I understood with absolute clarity that I couldn't just provide one meal and then retreat back to my glass tower, absolved of all responsibility. The following day, I went to the local market, a place I had only ever driven past, and I searched for their mother. I found her, a proud, beautiful woman whose face was etched with the lines of hardship and worry. I didn't lecture or pity her. I simply listened to her story. And instead of offering a temporary handout, I offered a genuine hand up, a stable job as a cleaner in my office building, providing a steady income and a chance for her to provide for her own children with the dignity she deserved. Following Adi's home that night started a ripple effect that spread through every aspect of my life, fundamentally altering my purpose. I started a small foundation within my own company, finally understanding that my corporate resources and influence could be leveraged not just for profit, but for people. We began partnering with local community leaders, people with real knowledge of the streets, to identify other families on the brink of despair. We focus on connecting parents with stable jobs and ensuring their children had consistent access to food and a path to education. My work was no longer about conquering markets. It was about building a stronger community. My glass tower, once my fortress of solitude, no longer feels like a place to keep the world out. Instead, it now feels like a resource center, a tool to be used for the betterment of the vibrant, complex city I finally call home. The panoramic view from my office window is no longer an abstract map of assets and opportunities. It has transformed into a living, breathing tapestry of human lives, a community that I am now intrinsically a part of. The isolation I once craved now feels like a prison for which I have thankfully escaped, and the silence of my office is now filled with a sense of purpose it never had before. A few weeks later, I visited Adiz and Emeka at their new, slightly bigger and brighter room. I brought Adiz a brand new Accra dress, the vibrant, joyful fabric a stark contrast to the faded one she wore when we met, now a true symbol of hope and renewed identity. For Emeka, I brought a proper leather football, a simple gift to help him reclaim a piece of his childhood. The unadulterated, blinding joy that lit up their faces as they received these simple gifts was a more profound and lasting reward than any multi-million naira deal I had ever closed in the boardroom. That night, driving home, I looked out at the real Lagos in all its chaotic, heartbreaking, and beautiful glory. The Danfo buses, the street vendors, the endless river people. They were no longer just a backdrop to my important life. They were a community of millions of individual stories, struggles, and dreams, and I was finally a part of it. I finally understood that true strength isn't about building walls high enough to protect yourself from the world. It's about having the courage to tear them down and let the world in. In a city full of overwhelming noise, I had almost missed the one small voice that mattered most. But now, I was finally listening.